So this is going to be a unique presentation. Uh, at the start, I want you to visualize that I work at your company and I've called you all and I've asked if we could have a meeting because there's a specific problem that I want to discuss with you. And I really need your input because it's not getting solved on my side of the fence. So what is my side of the fence? Well, I've been in strategy execution most of my career. And I spent 10 years at Gartner specializing in helping companies figure out how to execute strategy. Bottom line, we could be doing a whole lot better. And it's mostly on the people side where we're having problems. So let me dive in and we can start talking about this. So several years ago, I noticed, I like Gallup and I followed them. And I noticed all the discussions on the fact that, we had this massive disengagement problem. And I looked at it and I said, okay, numbers are somewhere between, 65, 67, 63% disengagement. And when I first heard the discussion, I was going, okay, that's like a ski slope. You put the engaged people at the really high part because they're the ones really engaged, and then everybody falls off down the end. The problem is it didn't make sense to me. It didn't give me any information. And one thing that's true about every Gartner analyst is we are model builders. We have to get everything onto a PowerPoint. It's absolutely, we freak out if we can't. So when I was looking at the engagement problem, I said, it's not a ski slope, it's a bell curve. And the key there was we have two sides of disengaged people. We have what I'm calling the entitled. Now, these people have been with us as employees for as long as there's been a world of work. They are never going away. They're people in transition. They don't like the job. They're not used to working. They're just out of school. They don't understand the system. It doesn't really matter. They're struggling and they're not totally engaged. We, as managers, truly know how to handle this. It's the right side of this bell curve that I want to talk about. I said to myself, well, if we've got the people we understand that are always with us, where's the rest of the disengaged population coming from? And I had worked in Boston back at the start of process reengineering, and it was basically a bloodbath. And I watched people, A, get laid off, or B, stay in jobs where they were working, but they got more and more and more work, always with the threat that they'll be laid off next. Okay, that made sense, and I labeled them fatigued. I presented this at a resource management conference, and a young woman came up to me and said, Donna, when I heard your keynote, I decided I didn't like you. Now, that will always get your attention. And then she said, but then I decided you're okay. Why I didn't like you was because I didn't think you understood the depths of my problem. Now, that's a pretty big wake-up call when somebody says, your chart's not right, you're not getting the problem. So I translated it again and realized, because I really did understand the problem she was having, or at least I thought I did at the time, that it was burnout we were having. At that point, I started researching this a lot more, and it really is burnout that is happening. People aren't seeing an end to this anytime soon. COVID has sort of pulled the blanket off the problem, but it's not really giving us an answer. So we've got people who we know are tired, but we don't really understand it. Then, just on the 12th of February, while I was working on this presentation, what popped into my email but a magazine article from Harvard, and it was called Beyond Burned Out. And finally, for the first time, someone else other than me was really saying that it was job and not mental stress. Now, if you're in HR, you know HR is really trying to, get people to handle the stress that they're under. But that's new stress on top of what I'm going to tell you is really a substantial burnout problem. So what are we really talking about here? The first is unsustainable workload. Now, as a Gartner analyst, most of my time, as in all of my time, was spent talking to IT communities. And I spent a lot of time on what we call resource management because it's a key component of executing strategy. Everybody had too much demand, but when I talked to people in the PMO, they all said, but Donna, people really aren't overworked. We've handled all of that. We've adjusted the utilization rate, so they really only have to deal with things 6 hours a day. Well, stand back from that for a moment and say 6 hours a day of too much unplanned work, task switching up the kazoo, too much firefighting, and we'll cover this a lot more, no sense of completion. And then imagine doing this every day and another day, and it never stops. Yeah, not a good place to be. The second factor the article identified was perceived lack of control. Now, here's where we get into the neurocognitive aspects of work. If you haven't read Your Brain at Work by David Rock, I strongly suggest it because he's got a very good model. And human beings just don't deal well with lack of control. If somebody comes up and says, stop what you're doing and do this, and you can't say, no, I'm in the middle of something, please let me finish, work isn't a very good place to be. The third one that I believe is really important is insufficient rewards for effort. Now, a lot of people translate that as we need more perks, we need free soda, we need something. And I'm going, whoa, wrong. One of the things we know from the project management community is rewards are good. Rewards as in thank you, job well done. The work is now over. I spent a huge part of my career actually leading strategy execution projects. And they weren't easy, the hours were long, things went wrong, all of that. But when we were done, we celebrated. People patted us on the back. They said, thank you. And that may sound minor, but again, going back to Tony Roxworth, it's what makes people willing to work. Now, the other three are important, and we'll talk about supportive community a little bit more, but the top three are really where we need to keep focused. Now, I've given you the problem statement. Now I want to tell you what it's like on my side of the fence, what we've been doing well, what we haven't been doing well. So when we get to the next section of this presentation, you'll really have an understanding of what the problem is. So there's like 1,000 books on executing strategy. And again, there's another great article from HBR that talked about the 5 myths of strategy execution. And Donald Sewell is the lead author. What I want to talk about today is the first myth, he says, is that companies can't execute strategy. Well, in fact, they can, but only within their own silo. So if you want to do it on an enterprise level, you've got to break things down. The other thing I want to talk about is that structurally, because remember, burnout is caused by structural job design. Structurally, if we want to improve productivity, we've got to treat people like human beings. We've got to stop running virtual assembly lines of work, because I really think that's what it feels like especially if you're sitting in IT today. So there's a key here, and it's really easy to miss. There's operations and there's strategy execution, and the two are not the same. Again, I think the research is originally out of Harvard. Riley and Tushman did some work they called the ambidextrous organization, and at least proved to my satisfaction that if you really want to excel at strategy execution, you've got to segment it. You've got to look at it, he calls as explore, as something that is unique, just like a program. We know what we want to do. It has a specific deliverable, a specific value, and it has an end date. Operations, on the other hand, is about optimizing where we are. Strategies are much more nebulous. What's the path? How are we going to get there? We know from all the agility research, yeah, things are going to go wrong, and we may go to Toledo, to get to Chicago. Operations is about margin and profit that we earn today. I'm an finance person. Let me tell you, when my brain clicks into margins and profits, I know that that's different than executing strategy. And here's the essence of what I'm hoping to discuss with you today. Strategy demands we assign the right people with the right skills at the right time to execute our plan. It really is all about skilled people. And honestly, everybody on your side of the fence may truly understand that. But I've been having a heck of a time for 13 years getting the people that I was helping while I was at Gartner to understand how critical that is, especially because they keep coming from an operational perspective. Operations are all about efficiencies and automating. Everybody in organizations that I talk to starts with a prima facie assumption that all people are plug compatible widgets. And you know what? People don't like being treated that way. And then finally, and this is incredibly important, strategy demands we stay creative, whereas I would say operations demands we stay vigilant. Completely different feedback systems. So on my side of the fence, we have a concept that we call resource capacity planning. I don't like the term resource because I don't think a person is a resource. So I call it people capability planning. At its very basic, which is what I'm showing you here, it starts with the assumption that you should segment your work. So if we have 100 people, we're going to make up these numbers, 10% keep the lights on. So we got 10 people who are keeping the company running, the power's on, the bills get paid, that kind of thing. We have 60 people who are running the business. They're operationally focused in some capacity. We have hopefully 20 people that really are doing strategic change the business activities. And then true innovation is different enough and unreliable enough. We're going to segment that out and make that a separate category. So here's what's really happening. I put this in front of people and they go, yeah, we understand that, Donna. And then they keep putting run the business activities on the change the business people. and the workload keeps going. It's kind of like, well, they're not totally utilized. Can we just sneak this in? And this is more important now. So what happens is there is nothing but this open sea of work. Whereas if we want to get anything accomplished, we've got to start, and this is not comfortable for some people, we've got to start at least creating boxes so that we have something to measure against, so that we have something that says, hey, we are spending 75% of our money and our people, and I'll contend people are more important than money, on run the business. We're not going to execute strategy. Now, what's part of why this happens? And this is going to be a theme in this presentation. It happens because managers, senior level managers, simply don't understand. They cannot visually see with the tools most companies use what the heck it looks like when they release all the work into the system. You see all that red on the screen? Red is bad. Red at the beginning equals too many projects competing for the same people. 10 years of calls at Gartner to hundreds of companies every year. Trust me, it may be even redder than that. The situation is dismal. Now, do we have solutions? Of course we do. I've been helping clients set up roadmaps. We've got value cases which replace business cases. So we know how to handle it. But part of what I'm going to tell you is its visualization. They can't see it. They can't touch it. It's hard to understand. From your perspective, look at all that red and understand that that means there are skills people don't have in the organization. And that's a big number. So our principle of treating everybody as a generic widget sounds good in theory, but in truth, as you know, they're not generic widgets. They have skills and they're things we need, and some of our people don't have them. And then finally, bottleneck resources causes this, but that's generic. We know how to handle that. It's difficult, but it's fixable. So what is the strategy execution model for people? Essentially, it says these 5 things. And I want to give you a little bit of basis that these are roughly in priority order, because I don't want anyone to hear that, let's go out and, turn over all the blocks. Let's go do everything at once. You can't. No organization can upend itself. So we've got to take area by area, and then we weave some of the rest of this through. So people capacity planning is where we start. Fundamentally, that problem is on my side. We have the tools to fix it if people would understand that you really can't do this without a tool. We have a lot of resistance. I mean, I brought in the first budgeting system at Rome when I worked there, when nobody else was even buying them. No one even knew they existed, because I realized a tool would help us do the job better. And it did. It was night and day. The overtime went way down. We do, on strategy execution, if we get people to use the tools, we can do this. Then we run right into skill development of existing staff. And that's why I'm talking to you. Yeah, no one on my side is qualified or competent to know anything about this. It really just ends there. Some of us who've been in the profession for a long time have got some of these skills, but it's pretty ugly out there and we're falling apart. Team development is something that we should know more about, but because of the operational aspect of it, we're losing the team orientation. And everything you've heard from the Agile community about the importance of teams is right. The fixed team discussion gets a little complicated. So when I say team development, I am talking about dynamic teams that can form seamlessly to solve any problem. People capability development is really a much more sophisticated concept because it's not job skills. And when we get into discussions of soft skills, it's really where we start talking about how somebody thinks, what their, personal mastery is, how well they're planning their career, something we have to do to fully get where we want to. And the last is cultural agility. That's really change management and mindset. But if we build out all of this as a self-reinforcing feedback loop, it naturally happens. Now, this may strike you as strange, but I have always contended that if I'm going to talk about something, I have to prove that I've actually seen it happen right in the real world. And one of the key things I'm advocating is that we can create a culture of dynamic teaming across our companies. I know because this was the way Intel managed back in the days of Andy Grove. This was my second real job out of my MBA program. And I didn't know any different. I mean, my boss tells me this is what you do. I go, yeah, okay. And the way it worked was we put something down on our quarterly MBOs that said we'd find a problem that we thought was worth fixing and we'd go fix it. But, and here's the important thing, we had to find 3 or 4 other people from different groups who shared our belief that there was a problem and it was fixable. Then we'd figure it out a little more. Then we'd go shop for a sponsor. And the person who got to take credit for solving the problem and leading the team was basically the person who found the sponsor. Now, everybody got credit for solving the problem. With that, sometimes we'd go out and we'd find out, whoops, best of intentions, the problem isn't solvable, it isn't what we thought it was, and we'd come back and declare failure. That was acceptable. We gave it a best effort. We weren't being silly or anything, and we found out it was more complex than we could do in the time that was allotted, and we could escalate or stop. But regardless of that, if we succeeded, we celebrated. And every quarter, we were either working on what we set for the quarter before, or we were setting another one. This builds a culture where problems are solved as a normal part of business. And that's a really critical concept in terms of building the culture that we want. Now, so I have given you pretty much the picture from my side of the fence. Now I want to specifically come to you and articulate where we need all the help. And we do need it, absolutely. So here's what I'm thinking, and please don't take offense that I'm talking about software. I really think software solves problems, and specifically here. Back in the old days, when you had to go out and buy a software package, it would cost $1.5 million, and you needed a 20-person implementation team. Because remember, I'm on the phone listening to clients tell me all this. And you check in with a client every 3 or 4 months, and 18 months later, on this Uber system that they were installing, they tell you they have successfully implemented time cards. If you wanted to tell me you had no reason to even think about software because you've seen that, I will agree. Right now, the world's very different. You can, I say, hire the right software and let employees use it. Okay. With SaaS, the world's different. You can hire software, you can rent it, whatever word you want. And we can now create a world where software creates a virtual management environment that will support not only how we work today, but support tomorrow's work from anywhere. Honestly, I don't know, and I'm thinking about this really hard, how we get work from home to form dynamic teams to solve problems. I've worked at home for a whole, well, at the whole time I was at Gartner and the last 3 years as well. My experience was pretty good. Gartner was good at work from home, but we were not trying to do operational work. We were all independent analysts who primarily wrote and talked to clients. When I've run program teams, when I've managed finance, I'm kind of struggling here. So I need a whole lot more, I think, technology support than I had before. I do need to say software has to support rather than control the people using it. People do not like computers, programs that spy on them and measure their clicks. I mean, that is not something human beings are comfortable with. But a software that they get something out of, that by participating with the software, their lives improve, pretty compelling case. Technically, what I want to see is software that shows present assignments and capabilities. Now, when I worked at Oracle Consulting, clearly we had resource management software. It showed where people were. It showed what people could do. We had 1,000 skills in our skills system. So it's really important. I mean, if somebody knew something, we had it in the system somewhere. That really allowed us to tailor what was going on. That also allows you to recognize the whole person. The software, and remember I said software that people use themselves, not somebody else doing it for them. Software can interact and show a career development path for the future. A lot of time organizations, the manager, may decide what the next career move is for an employee. An early manager of mine kept offering me promotions, and I kept laughing in his face, rather rude of me, but they were accounting jobs and I was a finance person. And finance people don't go into accounting. We made a very early career choice. That I wasn't a minority. That happens to people every day. People may have completely different ideas of their career than their manager may, and they have no way to work with their company to plan out, to get the skills, to get the training, to naturally develop in that direction. A tool can actually show that. Now, we're back to the sea of red. All of those red skills, you can't really see what it says, but it says, no skill, beginning skill, great skill. We got to fix that sea of red. And I don't see that happening. Consulting companies will fix it or they'll hire it. But I don't see that happening in industry at this moment. And I'm hoping that that's where strategic workforce planning can help us. Because you do care about skills, you care about where the workforce is for the future. And I'd like to offer that our current workforce is a strategic advantage, and improving our workforce and allowing people to continue to evolve is incredibly important. I also wanted to talk specifically about skills. Now, I found this on the web and have, changed a few things and adjusted a few things. but you notice they're not technical skills. They're not things that you can go to a class and really master. They're a lot of performance and behavioral. And that's kind of tough. That's a whole new mind shift. But I want to give you an example of something I've seen that was a wonderful learning technique. So entrepreneurial mindset. Anyone who's researched any of this will tell you it is the most important thing for getting problems solved and getting innovation in a company. That's it. You look at it, that's the one you need to optimize. So Adobe, and I don't think of them as a highly innovative company, that's my problem, not theirs, sponsored something they called Kickbox. And the way Kickbox works is that an employee applies and they fill out some forms and they put a proposal in for a new product, something they think will benefit the company. And if they get approved for this, they get a P card, a purchasing card for $1,000, and they get a couple extra hours a week to go work on this. So they enrolled 1,000 people in their program. And there's a webcast on YouTube about this. It was very interesting. People filled out their forms. As they're filling out their forms, why are you doing this? How much could it make? Et cetera, et cetera. They're starting to understand, hey, their good idea may not have legs. It might have been good in theory and not so great in practice. But they learned that because they had to think it through. And there were 5 different, we'll say forms, but thought processes the company took them through. So over time, a lot of people realized, maybe on form 3, that their idea was a bad idea. But they had a P card and they'd actually not spent anything with it. So what was unexpected initially is they went over and they shopped what everybody else was doing and said, I got $1,000. You want to let me on your team? I'll give you my $1,000 and we can actually get further in building out your idea. From the YouTube video, very, very successful. They got some teams that were up to 5 or 7. Now, these were teams that formed dynamically. No one put them together. No one told them they had to do this. This was completely self-organizing behavior. So where at the end of the first 1,000-person trial did they end up? Out of 1,000 people, it produced 3 ideas that actually did get to market and that they were happy with. But the man who ran the program made one statement, that it was the cheapest money they'd ever spent because what he got was 1,000 entrepreneurs. And when I heard that, oh my God, that's 1,000 people whose brains have now started to say, what's the problem? How can I fix it? Is this a good idea? What's it going to take to get it done? And they own that. They own that learning. My own research on entrepreneurial mindset says, if a company wants to cultivate it, the single thing they have to do is tell people they have the right to think about what needs to change. And I love that. Just tell people they can be entrepreneurial and mean it, and behavior starts to modify. So, ex-Gartner analyst Lars and I wrote the PPM maturity model back at Gartner. So I'm, of course, back to work on a new maturity model. So at level 4 of the people capability management, it's all about having a system of record where you can find the person who knows. Knowledge is so incredibly important, and we lose it. The larger the company, it's unintentionally almost more the stupider the company gets. Not because of the people, but because there's no way to know that you probably have an expert who knows everything. I was running one program and we hit a really hard rock, and my technical manager flew home to Colorado. And it just so happened he plopped into a first class seat next to somebody else who worked for the company. Since they both worked there, he could tell her his problem. She said, "Oh, I have a fix." Monday morning, 9 o'clock, our disaster was solved. Now, that was purely serendipity, but what if we could have put out into a system? Does anyone have an answer? People can bid on work assignments. Everybody's wanted to do that for as long as I've been working with these systems. Don't assign me. Tell me there's work out there and let me choose. We actually don't lose anything by letting people do it. If they're not qualified, we tell them and we help them become qualified. I mean, it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop that gets us a positive outcome. The key here is engaged, enthusiastic, self-directed employees solve more problems than we on a top-down approach could ever solve. Now, I said we're going to talk about training. Back to lessons learned. So at one point in time, I had a training assignment. I was responsible for curriculum development for 1,500 project managers. And I loved the job. It was really great because I realized that we were doing some things wrong. We had 2 weeks of planned training, and that before I got there was two 1-week classes. And I looked at what our work patterns were, and there was no way we could get off our assignments for a week. It was just not possible. So the 2 weeks of training you were guaranteed at Oracle Consulting kind of maybe wasn't happening at all. So I worked out a whole bunch of 2-day discussion workshops that could fit into our day. The goal was to produce a learning organization and make this something that was organic. The other thing that I found, and I tested this out, I inherited, when I took the job, the company had spent $465,000 developing the curriculum and the course material for a 1-week class. I took one look at it, and it was the biggest collection of garbage I had ever seen. And luckily, it wasn't just me. Everybody had pretty much come to the same point. I had to teach the class, had the class taught, so that I could kill the material. Well, I knew the material was so bad that I asked 2 of my favorite people, brightest ones I knew, to teach the class. John and Ann did it. They couldn't use the material, but they used the structure, which was actually fine. And at the end of the 5 days, when we handed out the "what did you think of the class" forms, it got all 5s for one reason. Everybody wrote 5 days with John and Ann was more informative about their job, how things got handled, what they were going to need to know as part of Oracle Consulting than anything else they could have done. There's a message here, there's a theme here, but you can't put people in intellectual classes when what they need to do is learn from experts. So our last session is really about visibility. When we go back to the starting point of the fact that people don't really feel that anyone even notices they're there and the work keeps coming, we've got to start thinking about a few things that are different. I don't know how many of you are familiar with communities of practice. I stumbled across this very early in my career, and I've started up another one at my current company. I also started the first virtual community of practice for project management on the web back in the old days when we had list servers. That ran for 14 years. It was worldwide. Why? Because people needed a trusted space to test new ideas and to safely get feedback that is supportive of their jobs, but is not tied to their jobs. And you can do that for the most part within a company if you're careful. I ended up having to take I started my community practice at Oracle. My boss didn't approve of a discussion of baseball, so I took it outside, which is where it stayed. The key is we have so many tools now. We have so much knowledge if we just start using it. And if you notice the circle, working out loud and learning out loud. If any of you who have not discovered John Stepper's Working Out Loud, I really would say go out to the web, take a look at it, look at his book. I was privileged to meet John and get him to speak for me at a Gartner conference. And fundamentally, what he's built is a system for people to make their work visible. I can't tell you how transformative that is. Just go to Amazon, download his book, and read the first chapter, and you'll see. But it's something that makes people better equipped to work at the right job. And I think if we could do working out loud, we can also do learning out loud, which I think will be a fascinating thing once we get it working. So where is all this going? I don't think we have to live with some 35 or 40% engaged people. I think we've got 75% that we ought to see engaged. And it just takes a change in attitude. It takes a change in what we focus on. It takes believing that employees are important. And from my perspective, in my community, it takes help because we don't know the skills. There's too much around people where HR isn't going to help us. We've actually got to work on getting the right skills for the jobs, and we need help there. So how do we magically do this? Well, one, as I said, training, skills, everything I've talked about. But we've also got a possibility that companies are throwing away now. And a friend of mine who's still at Gartner is doing some active research on this. And I call it knowledge transfer. So if you notice at the top of the blue dotted line, I've moved everything out, but the line starts coming down. Where does the line start coming down? Because people of a certain age, i.e. baby boomers, are getting ready to retire. But they don't want to take their knowledge with them. Everyone I talk to is desperate to find somebody that they can say, this is how you do. This is what my 40-year career taught me. That's the most valuable thing, because if I noticed when I was at Gartner, I would talk to somebody and I could give them, here's the standard answer. And then I'd ask questions. And the real answer was always subtly different. What is tacit knowledge? It's knowing when to play politics, when to go here, when to go there, when not to walk through that door. And there's ways to learn that. And there's a whole group of people that if we enroll them, maybe with shorter work weeks or less time on their full-time work and a certain percentage on actively working with people for knowledge transfer, we can get that. So the goal that I would like to achieve, and I think is even more critical now, is to get people to enjoy work. So what do you do next? You go build a team. I don't think any of us can do this on our alone. I think at a minimum, you need somebody who is truly deeply aware of what's going on with employee engagement. You need somebody from finance, if that's where strategy execution is, because they understand strategy. You need somebody from the PMO who is basically a proxy for where all the resources are. And you need yourself. I don't know in any firm how it's going to work out, but I don't think this is a one-person activity. My graphics team did this for me, and I'm so happy about it because fundamentally, what I've believed for many years is that we need to hold center for our people. We need to make them a focus. And technology can help us do that. It can be exhausting for one manager to try to do this. But if we get the right tools, the right information, and the right systems, we can make this work. I really believe this. And I'm hoping I'm making this vision clear enough to you that some of you might be interested in pursuing it. Because the goal is, and I am not telling you you have to buy my company's software, but I am telling you there is software that will do it. And that's really, really, really important. It's easy to use. The world's changed. And we ought to look at that change. So with that, I want to say thank you very much. If anything I've said has piqued your interest, reach out to me directly with email, connect with me on LinkedIn. I will talk to you about this anytime, anywhere. So thank you.
Well, that's a dangerous promise you've made, Donna, but I'm sure some of the audience members are going to take you up on it. So we do have a ton of questions already from the audience, but I don't want anybody to let that amount of questions we already have in our queue deter you from asking your question, because we will be sharing all of the questions, even the ones we don't get to, with Donna and the team at Prosimetry. So we will make sure that anything else that gets missed gets shared. But I'm going to start off with a few things that we had. One comment that came in, or one question that came in, was relating to. Hold on, let me find it. Near the beginning, you talked about an author or a book regarding the perceived lack of control. Can you repeat the name of that author?
Absolutely. The book is Your Brain at Work, and it's David Rock.
Okay. We're familiar with David Rock over here at HCI, and we thought that was it, but I didn't want to answer without being sure. So we got that covered. Another question that came in is, this one's from Robin, and Robin says, we had a bad time implementing our CRM system, parentheses, Uber system. The assumption was that the end users were tech savvy and the system was intuitive. It bombed. How can we avoid this happening again?
One, actually, believe it or not, pilot the system. Sometimes, and this is a technical IT answer, and I've been running programs for a long time, make sure it works. Make sure that organically, do not let anybody in your firm, Greg, one of my guys is on this phone, Greg, plug your ears. Do not let any salesman go to your CEO and say, this is the slickest thing since sliced bread, and buy it, and it's a terrible system. And hopefully nobody will shoot me. You need it to be usable, or every single thing I said is just so much nonsense. Is that a good answer?
I think so. A couple of exclamation points on that one. So now we have this one this one's from Laura. Laura says, I really enjoyed your presentation. I disagree with the bell curve, though, as it gives the illusion that entitled and burnout are exclusive. I envision a wave. Also, the ecosystem model is very similar to the roles of a leader. So more of a comment, but what do you think of that?
I don't know, but Laura, I would love to hear from you. You notice I keep updating the model. So if you've got a better model, please call me.
So there you go, Laura. And this one is, okay, I do want to get to this question. What was the individual's name when you were talking about communities of practice? John something?
John Stepper, Stepper.
And what was the name of the book that he had?
The book is called Working Out Loud.
Working Out Loud. Okay, there you go, Stephen. You got your answer there. Here's another one from Robin. She says, or it could also be he, I guess, says, while baby boomers' input appears to be important, this country is struggling with valuing them. How do you get managers who are years younger than the outgoing knowledge holders to understand this?
That's a really excellent question. I'm going to struggle a little with the answer. There's a level of sharing versus listen to me. Mm-hmm. And I'm incredibly fortunate. In my early years, I had people who would share their wisdom with me all the time. And you know what? I listened to every bit of it. I didn't always understand it. I listened to every bit of it and can still probably recount 90% of it. Mm. I knew they cared about what they were telling me and they wanted it to help me. Mm-hmm. That is what makes it work. I'm not talking about a talking head. I'm talking about creating ways like the community of practice, by the way. And there's a story I didn't tell, which somebody can email me, about some work that John Seeley Brown did with the Xerox Repair Depot. And it's a great story about the older people at the repair shop actually continuously training everybody else and how it was completely organic.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, I know somebody who works in dialysis, a very different industry, but there's certain things that people who've been dialysis nurses for 30 or 40 years just know. Exactly. That even if the machines and the techniques and the protocols have changed over the years, there's some things that they just know that is not easily captured and needs that organic transfer that you're talking about.
Yep.
So let me see. We have room for maybe one more question. So I'm going to try and make it a good one. These are really great, guys. And I'm going to say going back to, so this is another one from Robin. Robin's been very chatty and very thoughtful. So I'm going to reward that behavior. This is a comment going back to Donna's intro slides on the pandemic and how working from home has increased burnout exponentially. Employees don't know how to say no right now based on the fear of being fired. What do you think about that?
I think it's true. I deliberately was trying to minimize it because I'm still learning about burnout. I had a conversation with somebody the other day and a light bulb went on. Because burnout, real extreme burnout, causes people to leave the profession. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't aware, I didn't realize what it was like to walk away from something. And I used to do a lot of career coaching, and I almost embarrassed that I sometimes didn't give advice that was centered around the fact that they had simply had it. They were not only weren't going back to the office, but they weren't going back to that type of work. And to be honest with you, if you don't know how much of that is pre-existing in your corporation before the pandemic, I think HR is doing okay with meditation apps and, all that polling every week for mental health. It's not burnout. It's not solving the endemic burnout. So we're going to come out of COVID still wounded, I think, is part of my message.
Excellent. Well, a little depressing, but that's where we're going to end today. I think you're right, though. There's a lot of work still to be done. One comment just came in that I can't resist posting. Yes, I agree, burnout. I welcomed being laid off.
Oh, that breaks my heart. But yes, that's what I'm talking to people about. That's what I'm seeing. It's, oh my God, thank you. And it breaks my heart. I want people, and I made this decision when I was very young in my career. I want to make work better for people. It's where we spend so many hours, and I love work. And I want everybody to see that being creative and involved is a great thing. And I want to make that possible. And I need help to do it.
All right. Well, I love your energy, Donna, and I'm convinced that you're going to be a big part of making it all better. Just a reminder to everybody on the webcast today that today's webcast has been approved for HRCI SHRM credit and HCI recertification credit. Your credits for attending this webcast will show up soon in your My HCI profile under the transcript tab. You just click that in the top right-hand corner of your screen there. Hit the My HCI dashboard, then learning, then download transcript. Just give us about 24 hours to make sure everything you need there is lined up and up to date. And while you're there, don't forget to check out hci.org for even more free content, as well as information on our certifications and events. And of course, don't forget to sign up for the Workforce Planning Conference. Accelerate your workforce planning tomorrow with a great lineup of speakers. Check it out there at hci.org/conferences. And I'd like to say one more thank you to Donna for doing such an amazing rock star job today, and also the folks at Tempest Resource by Prosymmetry for making it all possible. And I'd also like to thank you, our webcast viewer. Thank you for spending an hour with us. Keep your stick on the ice, and we will see you next time.